Hi everyone, welcome to lesson 10, business continuity management, or oftentimes I will probably refer to as business continuity planning as well. So they're interchangeably from today's perspective. Um, it is normally not being recognized as part of information security, but I'm going to demonstrate that it is. And it is related at some point, although they require some sort of different training, and also they have different certification for BCP. Okay. So I'm going to skip this. So the purpose is to understand what is BCP and what is BCM, Business Continuity Planning and Business Continuity Management. We also wanted to particularly discuss four related subjects: disaster recovery, emergency response, crisis management, and contingency planning. Okay, you see that these are often being mentioned as a subject, but not necessarily covered by the BCM uh, situation. Also, I think more related to BCP is the way that the business continuity plans are being developed. We call a BCP life cycle and how our business continuity plans should be developed, should be tested, and should be maintained, and so on. Okay. And last but not least is the business continuity management framework for large corporations with probably multi-location and even cross-country jurisdiction and whatnot. You need to have a consistent strategy, consistent method in terms of developing these operational procedures to resume to acceptable critical business functions. So that's called a framework. So what is BCP, Business Continuity Planning? It is described or defined as a set of processes and procedures to support business enterprises, organization, and company to continue their operation and maintain their critical business functions during an interruption or disasters. Okay, when we talk about the term disaster, people quickly think of earthquake, fire, and so on. But we want to also cover interruptions. Power outage is interruption, a worker strike is interruption, and so on. Okay, so it is to cover quite a wide range of um, uh, situations. The ISO 27001, remember this? This is the Information Security International Standards. It does mention about BCM as a subject that an information security professional needed to pay some attention to. And so again, the definition is similar to counteract any interruption to business activities and to protect critical business processes from the effect of major failure on IT systems or disasters and to ensure the timely resumption. So the ISO definition covers interruptions that are probably not disaster related. So it could be a major failure on the network, a major failure on the system. So this could include cybersecurity situation as major malware infections or ransomware that actually make your IT system, all of them, not working or at least run into problems. Okay, so that's part of BCP and BCM as well. All right. So why do we want BCP? I think you probably have some idea, but there are some prevalent reasons behind that. I mean the ever increased dependence on IT systems in all area of business nowadays. There is no company out there that doesn't really use computers. The more we're depending on computers, any IT system networking infrastructures, IT infrastructure failure would actually mean real impact to the business. Okay. And also I think because of that part we understood, but I think this part is really related to us is that the inadequate safeguard or protection on the information system infrastructure that we are so dependent on from a business standpoint, it's also another real reason that we need BCP. I use an example that disruption could mean a major malware breakdown, like when ransomware or something like that. So it could have nothing to do with any natural disasters or natural disasters, but it could also have this high risk of because the controls are not there, safeguard are not there, information system and the infrastructure, the network could all be um, brought down because of lack of proper security safeguard so that it will have the need to run BCPs to maintain those critical functions for your customers, for your employees, for your business to continue running. Okay, there are other reasons, obviously, not just IT system, and together with IT system, we actually kind of, underlyingly mention that is data. We also rely heavily on the electronic data. So if the information system, the IT system, the infrastructure is not available, then we can really continue our business. Even though you had good servers, they're running the patches and so on, no malware, no virus and so on. But if we don't have access to the data, we have the same problem. Okay. And another thing, this is good. The second bullet is the increased awareness of business impact in disruptions. Business leaders are now more and more started to appreciate when IT system that is breaking down and there is no plan B, or at least no contingency planning to have their operations, running using other IT system or other partners or whatever. There are real impact on costs, real impact on time and resources, and obviously their reputations. So the increased visibility of business continuity planning and business interruption and disaster to business functions actually created the need for the business leader to say, hey, let's put aside this amount of money and let's give the IT team or the risk team or whatever to spend some time and build the proper business continuity planning for our company to make sure our critical functions are being retained in times of disruptions, in times of disasters. So that's a good thing. Also, um, if for any company that have experienced some minor interruption and have to go to their plan B, they realize that they don't really synchronize together. I mean, especially you're talking about a multi-location organizations that other locations may not have the same kind of understanding, interpretation of the plan. So the plans need to be the BCP. The BCP need to be formal, need to be consistent, and need to be across the board in order to make sure that the recovery can be done in a timely manner, effective manner. Last, again, not least, is the business competition and survivals. If your competitors and most of your competitors have good BCP, when you fail, or maybe when a natural disaster hits, like an ice storm or snowstorm, your competitor is going to resume, because they have good BCP plan, but you don't. That means you're not going to survive. So that's actually true. So I remember there was a statistic. I didn't actually include it in this particular slide. I used that in other trainings before. I remember there was a major flood in the U.S. Through the Hurricane Katrina. This is probably 2005 now, if I remember correctly. That was a major. Now, for us security people, and I'm also a BCP people, those big events, it is kind of imprinted in our brain because those are learning lesson learned. Okay, those are learning situation, learning opportunities. In Katrina, I think there are more than half of the business in New Orleans that didn't survive when they have no plans. They just never recover in a major flood, hurricane like that affect obviously their physical premises, obviously their IT infrastructure, the IT system, their data, and their people. Okay, some just bankrupt. Okay. Similarly, I think the Ghana Group, which is a major business group that do research for business in the US and around the world, 85% of large organization are defined as any company that have a thousand or more employee. Okay, so 85% of large US organization have some sort of disaster recovery plans. Okay, so at this point, we're not trying to differentiate disaster recovery and business continuity. Let's just say that they do have backup plan. They do have a plan B. Okay. But if you look at small organizations now, we're talking about small organizations that are less than 1,000 employees. So if you're talking about 900 plus employees, they're still considered a small organization, which for a lot of us, that's not small. That's not small. Okay. The interesting fact is that only 25 to 30% of small organizations have anticipated the cause of business disruption. So what that means is that the either the business leaders of that 70 to 75% of small organizations in the US never really consider to have a business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan. They never really think that when a disaster hits, it will really affect them and there's a real cost involved. Remember the cost we talked about? The actual cost of losing customers, losing sales, losing your employees, losing productivities, right? So this is really interesting figures. All right. So what are the kind of cause for business disruption? So this is a good chart that you can see things in the middle, forces of nature, earthquake, hurricanes, and so on. Um, and you can put them ice storm and so on. But there are just as important is the first one is the commercial and cyber crimes. I mean, we had devoted chapters to talk about cybersecurities, and we had courses to talk about cybersecurities, and we're fully aware that cybersecurity is a very true threat, and cybercrime as well. So this would involve hacking into your systems, stolen major data breaches, or ransomware. Okay, remember ransomware, meaning the bad guys will plan some malware to lock up your computer until you pay them money. They'll give you a code to unlock your malware or whatever they call it, ransomware, we call them. Okay. System failure is a valid business disruption. I mean, it could be a bad software, it could be bad maintenance, and so on. Health threats. So I don't know whether you remember back in 2003 in Toronto, there was well, around the world, there's something called SARS. Okay. This is the illness that you can spread from one person to another person that are actually catch from chicken. Chicken has these chicken flu that become so pervasive that you actually get transmitted very easily, and also the virus can stay on any service for longer than 10 hours. So that's the health threat. And of course, there are other kind of health threats. I mean, communicable diseases and public health is becoming a more prevalent, especially if our in metropolitan cities that are more congested, people are living more together. And you just imagine, last time you were on a TTC, I mean, people are so close in proximity with one another. Then, imagine illness being transmitted, so easily. Um, there is also terrorism, obviously. I mean, I don't have to say too much about that. I mean, luckily in Canada, we don't have too much of that. Sabotage meaning that your competitor is trying to plan something to disrupt you. I mean, in a competitive situation, so that's a disruption. And also, last but not least, is the service provider failures. Okay, we will talk about this not in this course in the future, that how we can manage third-party risk in an information security point of view. But it's true, you rely on service provider to finish some of the business process that you actually started, or you rely on them to provide you with data. And so, in a bank situation, money transfer is a classical example. I can if my customer want to transfer money to a recipient overseas, sure, I can help them to block that money and transfer that money. But somebody else over on the other side will have to help me. They are the service provider to finish that transaction, right? So that's these are all factors that take into play for any business disruptions. Okay. So these are the facts. Business continuity in disaster recovery has proven to help companies survive disaster. I already used the Hurricane Katrina situation. All right. Company that do not have business continuity plan will fail during or after a disaster. This is just the facts. It's not like, oh, we'll see whether we are lucky or not. We should be able to wing it, And with IT systems that are more and more complicated and business process that are more and more complicated, intertwined, it's not that easy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the related subjects, okay? These are the four related subjects that I kind of mentioned at the beginning, and we're going to have one slide each just to kind of give you an idea why they are related. Disaster recovery. Now, DRP, as it often being referred to, DRP are often referred to plans, procedures to restore and continue IT infrastructure services to support mission critical business processes. So these are mainly IT related. So IT infrastructure could include the network, obviously, network router, the internet, access to the internet, obviously databases, servers, operating system, and so on. So all of the IT systems. So if you had a data center, then you understand what I'm talking about. Disaster recovery planning. So this picture is part of like, these are server farm. We call them. These are all server boxes that are racked up in a data center. So DRP are more for IT system, telecommunication infrastructure, and networking infrastructure, etc. So disaster recovery include plans to make sure the critical IT systems continue in situation of business disruption and or major natural disasters and so on. Okay, so this is normally something that information security people get kind of exposed to a little bit, but not heavily. I mean, because DLP can continue, can develop without us, involved in some way. Okay. Emergency response, as what it says, is respond to emergency. So these are, basically response to any people that employee and customers that get harmed, injured, uh, and affected by your building. It could be a contamination and so on, and also for any physical damage on physical facilities, equipment, and so on. These are all considered emergency response. Of course, obviously, any harm, injury to people would probably be very high priority in the emergency responses. Again, typically they are not part of IT. There's not part of information security, not even part of IT. They could well be referred to as health and safety, depending on how big is your company and what sort of business your company is in. I remember, like, this is quite a long time ago. Um, I was involved in a Y2K project in a industrial company, which have so many branches all over the U.S. And one of the I think one of the facilities I went to visit in Detroit was making paint or painting automobile parts. But because they keep a lot of paint, they actually have chemical hazard procedures because those paints spraying appliances, equipment, or whatnot, if they fail, the fume of the paint will actually be very toxic. And so when we visit that plant, not only we have to kind of wear the proper gear or hard hat and steel toe boots and so on, we also were briefed on the chemical evacuation procedures. So these are considered as emergency responses. And for companies that actually deal with product lines, assembly lines, factories, and so on, that has hazardous materials or any potential dangers to people and the facilities, they do have a team that look after emergency responses. Okay. Crisis management, this is totally on the other end of the spectrum. These are purely business processes. They do involve information security, for the reasoning of trying to get us to produce or provide them the threat landscape, the vulnerability of the IT system or the information asset. So basically, crisis managements are business teams that comprise of communication people, legal people, so to brief the senior executive when something bad happened. So, and what they should say to calm the public and so on. So imagine you're running a bank or financial institution, and there is rumor about there is a major failure in your investment, okay, or major scandal. So your customers are afraid, so you don't want them to rush and take out all their money and investment from you. So you want to make sure this is a crisis and you manage them. It could be a perceived crisis, but it could be a real crisis. So same thing if there is a major a virus attack for most of the financial institution, and you're assuming we're still using the example of a bank, then the crisis management team will kick in to make sure that the CEO is going to come out and say to the shareholders and the public that ABC Bank it's fine. We identified the virus. We are in the process of eradicating it. We don't have any ransomware. So you want to craft the message that's going to calm your customer and not let your customer getting into a panic. Okay, so that's crisis management. And the last one is contingency planning. So we're talking about plannings around, this is like real plan B. So if you don't have power, then you want to keep a, if you're afraid you don't have power, then you want to keep a generator available. This is typical hospitals, right? Hospital cannot be uh, caught in lack of electricities or lack of supplies and so on. So they always have a contingency plan of keeping certain medication in bulk, maybe off-site, having generators so that when there is power outage, they'll kick in, run the generator so that their equipment still being supported and so on. They have uninterrupted power supply UPS and so on, so that the patients are not being threatened and being affected, and life will be saved. That's contingency planning. So the next thing is about BCP life cycle. Okay, BCP life cycle explain how business continuity plan can be developed and test and maintain and so on. This is how you follow when you want to develop plans. The first is to identify, and which is what we call risk assessment. We talk about risk-based approach, same thing here. We can really develop business continuity plans for every business function within your company. You needed to identify which are your critical business functions, so you develop plans for that. You also want to identify, understand what the risk is the company is facing. You can plan for all of the risk situation, right? So you only identify risk situations that are vulnerable to your company, okay, applicable to your company, and also any likelihood and the impact of those potential scenarios. All right. Again, we talk about the risk assessment situations in previous chapters, and that's what that is. And then we identify, and then we prioritize, and then we start, and then before we start building our plans, this is the things that we have to do. Once we have identified which are our risk scenarios, which are the disaster scenario that we have to plan for, then we start doing what we call business impact analysis. As what it says is that we want to conduct an analysis on impact on our various business functions based on a different scenario. So if earthquake happen, what's going to happen to us? If there's a major labor strike, how are they going to affect us? If TTC is out, how are they going to affect us? And so on, right? So that's what we do, is to use the tool called business impact analysis to identify which are the critical functions within the organization, and determine the impact of not able to perform business functions beyond the recovery time objective. I'll explain that term a little bit later on. That's kind of like a marker, how long we're going to stay not operatable. Okay, once we have identified the risk, we have assessed the risk, and then we have conducted a business impact analysis to identify which are critical functions. Okay, so now we can develop strategies. We can develop a strategy. So a good example would be if we identify our critical function need to retain our data almost kind of like instantly. So we can really afford the downtime of our computer system. So I give you a good example. Not so much this is exactly related to that, but I'm talking about like even the bank, right? So the bank is like you don't really need constant up. I mean, but it does become very critical. Just imagine if I want to go on doing my online banking and hitting a few return and just couldn't, and then they're just saying that server is not available. I can live with that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe half an hour. But if that go on for an hour, I'm starting to get worried, right? I mean, is there something wrong with my bank and so on? And not just online banking, if it affect the actual banking system at the bank. So you imagine people are lining up and can't get the money, for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes. I mean, that's gonna be quite critical. So for those situations, you want to have a backup data center in a matter of seconds to switch over so that you won't get bogged down by any interruption, by a physical location. So that's strategy, right? So depending on what your risks are, what your tolerance level, then you develop your different strategy. But if your situation is that, nah, well, I can my orders can my situations. Okay, talking about a order taking, right? So customer come into your stores and want to place an order, and your computer system is it's out. Okay, okay, I can still use the old order taking paper form. So you keep a stack of paper form ready, and then you use those forms and write the order. Take their credit card, write down their number, and charge it later. So you can still have a business continuity planning in like a business process for the outage of your order taking computer systems at your storefront location. Now, that is of course assuming that you have storefront, right? Nowadays, so many uh, retail company that are selling, which doesn't use a storefront, they use the internet or both. So you still have a challenge if you run out of if your IT system has a problem. But the point of these is that you define what are critical. You define what your RTO recovery time objective is how long you can recover, and cost benefit, and then you determine how quickly it need to be resumed and how reliable and availability is it like a 99.9% availability, or you can accept about 80% reliability, not reliability, availability, and so on. Okay. So that's a strategy. That's not even a plan yet. Then, with all that, you can now start developing and execute the plan. When you are developing a BCP plan, okay, it should be a corporate effort. Okay, everybody related should be involved. So critical business function leader and their team need to be part of the table. Now you need the proper trained BCP guys to be there to interview you, to tell you what information you needed to provide in order to actually compile a meaningful, effective BCP. Okay, but the owner of the critical business function must come to the table. Often the mistake of a company is that because the competitors is getting BCP, so we should better get one. Okay, I'm gonna hire a couple of consultants in BCP, and you let them lock themselves in the room, come up with 4 weeks, they come up with all of the BCP plans for different departments, and then we'll let them go, and then we're fine. No, absolutely wrong. That's not gonna work. Okay, the business ownership is is key in order to have effective execution. If the business owner of the critical business function have no idea, not involved in developing that BCP, they not going to know how to execute them. And during execution, they might not even work. Okay. And together with that, almost true in all of the information security situation is that senior executive has to put commitment of time, budget, and resources to the BCP initiative, just like an information security awareness program. Okay, senior executive, if they don't convinced, if they don't put the commitment in, it's not going to work. Okay, and last but not least is called a scenario-based planning. We cannot really plan for everything or every situation, so it has to be risk-based, and it's also need to be scenario-based. So we will develop plan to be response to scenarios like situations. So earthquake being a scenario, flooding a scenario, fire is a scenario, major power outage, labor unrest, terrorism. So all those are scenarios that we needed to think about, okay? And plans should be scenario based. Okay, this is actually the last step of the life cycle, but this is the most important one. After the plans has been developed by the different parties, especially the business owner of the critical business function, the plans need to be tested. Okay, so how are you going to test it, Michael? Well, there are different ways. You can actually test it to the full extent, like running like a dry run, or a lot of the times people run a testing, what we call tabletop exercise. So key people will sit in the conference room, you block for more than 1 hour, maybe almost a whole morning, and then a facilitator, usually it's the BCP consultant, will come in and bring with him or her a scenario. So let's say the scenario is that we had a major snowstorm this morning, that we have 35 centimeter in Toronto, and then the major arteries are blocked, TTC are not running, GO trains are stuck, and nobody's able to drive on the street because of the heavy snow that we are not prepared for. And the city of Toronto, the snow removal somehow it's not working. The drivers are not able to go to the depot to drive those snow removal equipment, which is fairly realistic. 35 cm of snow is not realistic, but all of these others are realistic. So you create a scenario, the facilitator into the room, and then post the scenario, and then now kick into gear. Nobody is able to come to work. Okay, your operators are not able to go home, and so on. So you started to tell them, okay, so what are you gonna do? This manager, what are you gonna do? Who are you gonna call? Who are you gonna escalate? So that's how they should. Oh, okay, let's look at the plan and so on. They either have the plan on the laptop or they actually have the plan in a book, right? So that's what we call testing of the plan. Why is it important? Because only when you test the plan, then you realize that, oh, the step that we have written is actually not working. They asked me to, or the steps are not in synchronize, not in sequence. It's not working. So only when you really flush this out, and then you know that whether your plans are realistic, practical, workable at all. Okay, there's a good saying in the BCP world is that if a BCP plan is not tested, it's not a BCP plan at all. Really good, right? So if the plan is not tested, you can't really say that that's a PCP because it might not work. I mean, it's like you are buying insurance, okay, to cover your home or your car, and when you run into a situation, you need to claim it, and you realize that in the policy there's a fine line saying that this situation is not covered. So it's kind of like that, right? So you develop a plan, but the plan doesn't work, doesn't help you. The other thing is maintenance. Maintenance is important is that because in the plan, there are a lot of information that are really, really important to be up to date. I'll give you a good example. Like you're probably aware of what is a call tree, right? A call tree is when in time of emergency or BCP, then people will pick up the phone and call a few people on the list, and those people will call the other people. This is in case that there are major communication breakdown and so on, or this is something very specific to your company. You don't want the public to know, so there's not something like a snowstorm or something. It could be like a ransomware situation, and so the core tree, my point is that the core tree is dependent on those phone number being accurate and up to date. Now it's better now. I mean, if you change from Rogers to Bell, I mean, you can still carry the number over. And you move from Utopico to Milton, you can still carry the phone number, likely. But still, there could be situation that employee get changed, phone number get changed, and so information on the BCP plan need to be reviewed periodically and updated periodically. Or there's a process for any of the key people information, if ever changed, there's a process to feed those information back to the BCP. That's actually very important. Again, same thing, right? If you're relying on a plan and there are critical people on the chain for call, and if those numbers are not accurate, then you kind of broken. The chain is broken. So you cannot really continue. Okay, so let's take a look at business continuity and risk management kind of as a big subject. So what does that involve? So there are a few things that we want to mention. The business impact analysis is what we do in the second step, doing the analysis. Through that, we assess the impact of an outage. So if there's a power outage, if the system is down, if there's no telecommunication, no internet, that's called what is the impact of this outage to the business functions. Okay, and then from that you determine which business function are time critical, so they have to be available like 24/7 and so on, and determine these time critical system, which server, which system, which application, which database, or whether they are on a different telecommunication router and so on. All right, and then from that we want to determine what is the required availability. Again, we're going to explain that recovery time objective. So recovery time objective is the required availability for business function. So meaning that how quickly you want to resume your business function. That's called the required availability. And then determine critical and non-critical business function. We want to separate them, but sometimes we have to be careful because non-critical business functions can become critical very quickly if the non-business critical functions provide input to a downstream critical business function. If my downstream business unit is a critical business function, I am responsible to provide things to them. If I don't have a BCP, when things happen to me, I can produce, I have no output for the critical business function, then they cannot carry on. That I am the weakest link. So if I'm an upstream business function, when I'm evaluating myself, I have to make sure there is no downstream critical business function that are dependent on me and has no alternative. If they do depend on me, then my business function become a critical business function also. Okay. Also through the BIA, the interdependency of business function, as I mentioned, the upstream and the downstream, become apparent. So you need to, conduct the business impact assessment. The business impact assessment, now I'm not going to go into detail. It is actually a process with different area questions around different areas, so that you ask the business owner so that they will provide you with information. Then we can flush out and know whether they are critical or not, what is the RTO, and so on. Okay, and then we'll of course determine the recovery resources required. So if the system is down, who's going to be come back, or who's going to be available, and what need to get executed in order to bring our system back to operational. Recovery time objective, I talked about these 3-4 times already. Okay, so the proper definition is it defines how quickly IT system, services, and processes must be operational following some kind of an instance interruption or disruptions. Okay, this include recovery of the application, like the system application, business application, and the recovery of data and user access to those applications. So to show it on a diagram, okay, on the leftmost part of the diagram is the point of interruption, and then you quickly wanted to recover the business operation until the business function and the IT system become operational with the most current and accurate data. That 2 point in time, from the time of disruption to making system available with accurate data, that's called the recovery time objective. That could be anything between 2 minutes to 24 hours or 72 hours or even longer. Okay? So another similar term, but more on the data, it's called recovery point objective, RPO. RPO is the point in time that marks the end of the period during which data can still be recovered using backup journals or transaction logs. It defines what is acceptable loss of data. Okay, this is interesting. So this is talking about data. Okay, how far back you can rely on your data, or to be realistic, it's how much data you can afford to lose since the last backup. Okay, this is a very good question. Think about it. So if your backup is done 12 a.m. last night or early this morning, you start coming to work at 9, the system get major problem at 10. So you are losing theoretically 10 hours of data because your backup is from 12 midnight last night. So anything since then until now, 10 o'clock, it's lost. But practically, if you operate only at 9, then you probably have maybe 1 hour of data. So that's acceptable to you or not. So you define that. Okay. So if your RPO is 24 hours, meaning that I only do daily backup every day, so the most I'm going to lose is 23 hours and 59 minutes of data. Or let's say 24. Okay, that's a worst case scenario, right? I mean, your company, assuming that you're a 9 to 5 shop, then you probably close shop after 6. So you probably had, yeah, you still lose data of about 6 hours. It's still critical. It's still bad. But if you have ways to reconstruct those data, then you don't need your RPO to be shorter. So going to the diagram, similar. So the last backup would happen probably before the disruption, okay? And then there's a recovery time objective using the data, the last backup data. So anything between the last backup to the point of disruptions are gone. So that's something that you lost. The time between the point of disruption and the point of the last backup, okay? So you kind of understand where things fit, right?